Well, this is the fifth and final week of our intro to the Sermon on the Mount. We still have a long year to go. We are in the Sermon on the Mount all year, but these 5 weeks have been our introduction to the whole sermon. And I want to start by telling you a story about a time I faced a choice. It was February 2003, so a couple years ago. And I was a freshman in college, and I had a choice to make, and there were deadlines when I had to make that choice. How would I spend my summer? I hadn't actually thought about this choice that I made all the way back then, but I was hanging out with Brad and Joan earlier this week, and it came up in conversation, and I started to remember how significant this choice was in my life. I faced 3 options. I had 3 invitations. I could go to one of the most beautiful places in the entire world, one of my favorite places anywhere, and I could spend the summer there on property staff for this camp, and this Young Life camp. And this is a place that you can only get to by boat or seaplane. I could spend the entire summer there. I could go to this tiny cow town of 10,000 people, 45 minutes outside of Seattle, in the middle of nowhere. And I could spend the summer working with middle schoolers at this small church as their summer intern. Or I could spend my summer at UC Davis, and I could spend my summer as a mascot instructor at a cheerleading camp. Thanks, Carla. You might be surprised to learn that I was our school mascot my senior year of high school, but I somehow have a feeling that most of you aren't surprised at all, and you go and feel like that probably computes. So this turned out to be a pretty massive decision, but at the moment, I actually had no idea how significant it would be. I just thought I was choosing between 3 fun summer options. They all sounded fun, which you're probably not surprised by. Most things sound fun to me. And to be honest, right, it didn't even cross my mind to pray about it. At least not at first, but because I just sort of saw summer as my summer, like a break from school and a chance to make some money, have a cool experience, and summer was mine to enjoy how I wanted to. What did I want to do this summer was the question I was wrestling with. Thankfully, I had a mentor who reminded me, praying is important. To see if God had any ideas for how I should spend my summer. And as I started praying about it, it's funny how quickly the mascot instructor thing just sort of faded away as a legitimate option. And then it was down to working at a camp or working for a church, both reasonable options. And I can't tell you exactly why the church rose to the top spot, but I did have this sense that while a summer at this camp would be an amazing experience, unforgettable experience, I felt I needed something else. The Holy Spirit wanted to do something else in me. And God had already been doing some powerful things in my life to change the desires of my heart. And I knew, I had this sense that this obscure ministry in the middle of nowhere with middle schoolers was the sort of narrow gate and harder way that Jesus is naming at the Sermon on the Mount and was inviting me into. For the gate is narrow and the way is hard that leads to life. I mean, that choice was a definitive moment for me and for my life and for my relationship with Jesus. And this was just one, right, of many decisions I faced in my life, in my faith, that moved me a particular way. So just to pause, just so that you can sort of latch onto this in your own way, can you think of a key moment, a key decision in your life, in your faith, that shaped the direction of everything that follows. And I don't mean when you accepted Jesus in your life, but where Jesus was directing your life, and there was a key moment of decision. So I just want to give you a second to consider and to name that for yourself. Jesus says, few will find this way. Jesus says, many will enter by the wide gate and will take the easy way. I don't know what you imagine when you hear Jesus talk about entering a gate and traveling a path or a way. But it's not an accident that the early church came to identify itself, call itself the way. And that Christians is actually just a name that others used to describe those who followed Jesus. But these followers of Jesus saw themselves as followers of the way. What do you picture when Jesus talks about a choice between destruction and life? My first instinct is to hear this only in terms of the future and eternity. I'm tempted to hear this as a heaven or hell kind of decision. Like, believe in Jesus or don't. Choose Jesus or reject Jesus. Decide to follow Jesus or don't. In the Bay Area, where we live, a tiny fraction of people attend any sort of church service on a Sunday morning, where a very small fraction of people say they believe in Jesus. It's really easy for us to read this passage, to hear Jesus and see the wide gate and the easy path as the life that unbelievers out there who don't go to church are living. Right? While we, church-going believers, we are the ones who clearly have chosen the narrow gate. We go to church when it's not easy, so we clearly are on the hard path. But I actually don't think this is the choice that Jesus is offering us. I don't think that our presence here this morning means that we have chosen the narrow gate. It doesn't automatically mean the way that we are living will lead to life. Because consider who Jesus is talking to as he gives the Sermon on the Mount. He's surrounded by people who believe in God. This is a Jewish crowd surrounding Jesus. These are not unbelievers. These are not pagans. And what Jesus confronts them with is the possibility that you can believe in God and live in such a way that your life will bring destruction. Destruction to the people that you love, destruction to the world around you. In other words, among believers, there is a narrow gate that few will find, and there is a wide gate that many will take. Among those who show up and listen to Jesus and say they want to follow God, there is for us an easy path and there is a wide path. And those who are gathered around Jesus, listening to him, can't assume that they've chosen the narrow path just because they are there with Jesus, while so many others aren't even there. Jesus is addressing those who are right in front of him, who he is making eye contact with. He's offering them the choice. Those who are present, saying to them, many of you who are here right here, right now, will choose an easy way, and you'll do it in my name. And only a few of you will choose the hard way. I wonder if we rehear this passage differently. If we hear Jesus not saying unbelievers and believers, but among those who are here who believe in God. I've been thinking a lot about choices lately. I don't know about you, but I rarely think of my choices, my everyday choices, as a matter of life and death, life or destruction. But I've been watching this reality game show on Amazon Prime. Maybe some of you have seen it. It's called Beast Games. That puts contestants, it's called Beast Games because the YouTuber who runs it, his name, he is Mr. Beast. That's the name he goes by. But here's what's interesting about it. It puts contestants and the contestants' choices and the consequences of those choices on full display. The show starts when 1,000 people walk into this massive room. At the center of the room is a giant pyramid, a massive stack of cash, $5 million, actual cash. And these 1,000 people have been chosen to compete against each other until there is only one person left standing. The one person walks away at the end with $5 million. And so in one way, this show is actually just like a lot of other game shows. But where it is different is in how clear every choice is. And these choices have time limits and they have consequences. At every point in the game, people are confronted with massive decisions that lead to a kind of life or destruction, both in the game and in real life. For example, before the game even starts, 1,000 people in a room, and the host says, he looks around this room of 1,000 people and he says, you could walk away right now. For some unknown amount of money, he doesn't tell them how much they will make. You can walk away. You can quit before the game even starts. Walk away with guaranteed money. Quit before even starting or play, right? I mean, there is a clear choice in that invitation. Take some guaranteed but unknown amount of money or compete and potentially walk away with nothing. What would you do? Many of you know Jacob Parnell, who is the minister at Tri-Valley Church of Christ. His wife and his 5 daughters are all watching this show together. And as a family, they are all actively debating. They pause it and they're like, what would you do? I would do this. I would do this. And they're wrestling with the weight of some of these choices. Instantly, before the game has started, 50 people walk out. They take some money and they go before the game begins. They're gone. And then the game gets started. And it gets started with a brutal decision. Everyone in this room starts on a team of 80 people. There are 12 teams. Only 9 teams will move on to the next round. To help us just sort of visualize this decision, on a much smaller scale, right? Imagine we're playing this game. Each section is a team. So we have 4 teams. One section will be eliminated. The way a team moves on is that one person on your team has to freely and willingly quit. I saw big eyes immediately. Just one person on your team has to immediately quit. As soon as that one person quits, your whole team moves on to the next round. And there's a timer. And when the time runs out, any teams that didn't have somebody voluntarily quit, your whole team's eliminated. I mean, think about this decision for a second, right? Every single one of you just passed up on guaranteed money. You didn't know how much, but something. So you stayed in, and now you're being asked to walk away with nothing. The only thing you get is some satisfaction of knowing that your sacrifice allows the rest of your team to move on and keep playing. Mind you, this is the very beginning, so these people don't know each other very well at all. One person quits so that 79 others continue. This is the first 2 minutes of this show. This show's intense. There's a lot going on. In 9 episodes, it's 9 episodes in, and these are basically the decisions over and over again. There's this moment when, again, 4 teams are told each team needs to select a team captain. And so look around your area. Who would you select? Who's the most trustworthy in your section, on your team? Once everybody picks their captains, those captains come up here to the front, and each are offered increasingly larger amounts of money until the offer is $1 million. Like, $5 million is still the end prize. But now, here in the middle of the game, each of these 4 is offered $1 million, and here's all they have to do is take it. If they take the $1 million, they stay in the game. But their whole team is out. I keep hearing, right? Like, you can feel it. These decisions are weighty. If they turn the money down, get to the very end, turn it down, refuse it, their whole team moves through the next round. Right? I mean, what's fascinating about this whole show is who makes which decisions. Like, why people make the decisions that they make. Who chooses the hard path early on, only to start maybe making different choices, choosing an easier path as the game continues. What I love about this show is that it uses, obscene amounts of money to raise the stakes and really show the kind of decision making that we actually are making almost every single day. Decisions between ourselves and others, ourselves and our families and our neighbors and foreigners, and right? I mean, there is just this range of decisions we're making all the time. But we rarely see it, though. It's rarely as simple as an amount of money and a person looking you in the face. But the decisions are all there, right? Do we make our choices to best improve our lives or our families' lives? Do we see ourselves as individuals out for ourselves? Nobody else is going to take care of us. Or do we see ourselves as part of a team or part of a community? Do we see ourselves as having responsibility for others around us? Do we have some sort of moral or ethical framework that would actually help us make these decisions? To what extent do we see life, real life, as requiring large amounts of money or not? And this last question is really the starting place for Jesus. put up a prize of $5 million and 50 people will just immediately walk away. Right? Life for those 50 is clearly about something else other than competing for potential money. Right? And in a way, they chose a narrow gate. Take it another step, and there are 9 people. The 9 people from the 9 teams who self-sacrificed out of 1,000 who didn't take any money to leave. They just walked away, willingly walked away with no money. Right? I mean, they're living by a different set of values. Those who find it are few, Jesus says. Think about the choice Jesus offers the crowd around him. Life or destruction. And here's what's obvious. Jesus' version of life. Some might imagine life is $5 million. Or it's to be debt-free, or it's to have, the biggest house, or it's to have however you answer that question. Jesus has a version of life that is so very different from the crowd that is around him. Right? He has already said things like, how good is life for the poor in spirit? How good is life for those who mourn? How good is life for those who are unimportant? Can I get an amen? that was half-hearted. I don't think we believe it, right? I mean, there's a sense in which the crowd around Jesus, they're not convinced that this is where life is yet, right? And then Jesus takes it to another place entirely. How good is life for you when they insult you and persecute and speak any evil lies against you on account of me? Ooh. But celebrate and shout for joy, because your reward is great in the skies. I could imagine a room of 1,000 people, and 9 people sign up for this. But here's the thing. There are 1,000 people standing there with Jesus, saying they want Jesus. They hear him offer life and kingdom and an inheritance. And they say, I want that. But then Jesus begins to whittle the crowd down with a series of images, right? And clarity around what the choice actually is. And our passage this morning ended with these images. First, an image of 2 builders. One builds a house that leads to destruction, and the other a house that stands the test of time. Right? And Jesus makes it clear that there is a difference between these 2 builders. One hears Jesus speak and does what Jesus says, and the other hears Jesus speak and does not do what he says. And in a way, I mean, the choice is just that simple. It's that clear. But wow, that does really start to narrow things down, doesn't it? Among the 1,000 gathered around Jesus, how many are hearing Jesus speak and at the same time trying to figure out how to get around the things that Jesus is saying? How many are there listening to Jesus speak and doing their best to go, well, he didn't mean that. What he meant was... How many are trying to figure out, okay, what's the bare minimum I can do so it looks like I'm a follower of Jesus? I mean, remember, we're talking about a crowd who believes in God. a crowd who attends the synagogue weekly, a crowd who speak of their God in their everyday lives. We're talking about people. And as we move forward, the group around Jesus will be people who say they trust Jesus for salvation. But there is this lingering question of whether they trust him as Lord. There is a sense in which some who are gathered around Jesus really want the Father, but they don't want the Sermon on the Mount. Like, how many people who go to church are maybe a little too excited about the idea of a God who punishes the wicked, the sinners out there, but maybe aren't quite as excited to follow the God who puts on flesh and comes and says, I want you to love your enemies and I want you to pray for those who persecute you. Do what Jesus says and your life will lead to life. Don't do what he says and your life will fall apart. This is the first narrow gate Jesus invites people to come through. You will be able to tell the difference between believers who do and don't do, right? What they hear Jesus say. To a point. Which brings us to the second image Jesus uses. And it's kind of a shocking one. He talks about two trees, a tree that bears diseased fruit, a tree that bears good fruit. And Jesus talks about people who do what Jesus did and do what he said to do, but Jesus says, right, there are people who are doing the things that I said to do that I don't actually know. Jesus tells us that there is this way of taking his teaching and stripping from it relationship, right? Taking it out of the context of a people who have been loved by God and saved by God and called by God to live a particular way. And there's a way of using the Sermon on the Mount to set out to make the world a better place, while completely disconnected from the God who made the world, a God who ordered it by his design and his love and called it good. And so if there are some who want the Father but don't want the Sermon on the Mount, there are also those who want the Sermon on the Mount but not the Father. Right? They want a new set of rules, of principles, a moral framework, a collection of wisdom to use that will make their lives better. But they don't want a personal relationship with the God who helps us discern when to follow a rule and when not to. They don't want the messiness of relationship and conversation and dialogue where God might sometimes tell us to do one thing, but in another circumstance actually tell us to do another. Never mind that the Lord's Prayer is at the very center of the Sermon on the Mount, a reminder that all of this is about invitation to be with God in conversation. There are some who want God's gifts. They want what God has to offer. His teachings, his wisdom, principles for life, but they don't actually want a relationship with the real God who knows them and loves them. And here's the challenge for us as we think about this group of people of whom we might find ourselves part. They don't clearly separate themselves at the gate, so it can be hard to identify them, right? In fact, they often look just like those who know Jesus and are known by him. Like they might be part of the 9 out of 1,000 who stepped through that narrow gate, but it will only be later on when the fruit of their life becomes evident and we realize they've been walking what looks like the narrow way, doing things that Jesus said to do, but they're actually totally disconnected from Jesus. They're totally disconnected from the source of life. And so the fruit of their life, when it finally comes, tastes bitter. It is diseased and it destroys often the church and the church's witness. The fruit is seen in people, and maybe you've had this experience. I think in many ways, when we listen to our non-Christian neighbors who are deeply concerned about how far away from Jesus the church can seem. The church can easily be made up of people who've been following Jesus in name for 30 or 40 or 50 years, but have a wake of broken relationships behind them, who have zero reconciliation. We could list the diseased fruits forever because we have seen them and they have hurt us and the church and each other and the world. It's kind of amazing that for 30, 40, 50 years, there are people who could say, who we might even be tempted to say, they have done amazing things for God. They've done big things for God in their years. But as we look at their life, 30, 40, 50 years later, there is just a lack of spiritual fruit. Maybe their attitudes toward non-believers are just harsh. Maybe they look at the church for what it does for them or doesn't do for them. You can often sense a bitterness and a resentment, an impatience and an anxiety. Not gentleness, but harshness. And you find so little evidence that this person in their life is connected to the source of love. We are to do the things that Jesus says. Right? A good biblical way of saying this is like obedience. But there is this deep sense in which these must be done in the right way. It's not just following a rule, but they actually must be done in right relationship. Like this is actually the heartbeat of all of Jesus' words. It's the heartbeat of the entire Sermon on the Mount. Right relationship with God and with others. The Bible usually uses, our English translations usually use the phrase righteousness. And I just dare you in your reading of the Sermon on the Mount, just keep replacing righteousness with some variation of right relatedness, right relationship, and see what begins to come from that. Because this is what Jesus cares about. And so the choice before us this morning actually isn't to follow Jesus or not. Because it is possible to follow from a distance. It's possible to imitate Jesus without intimacy with Jesus. The choice is to enter relationship. But only those whose right relatedness, it's a mouthful, I get it, but it's worth the mental shift that happens when you change those words. It's only those whose right relatedness exceeds that of the scribes and the Pharisees who can enter. The scribes and the Pharisees, they thought they were on the narrow path, but they were walking the same old path that everyone else defaults to. And Jesus, here in this place, calls us to more. We will know him, and we will be known by him when we are with him. Will we exceed the letter of the law in order to joyfully do our Father's will? Will we maintain a relationship with the rules, or will we deepen our relationship with a real person who Jesus calls our Father? This is the choice before us, and it is a choice between life and destruction.